The butt of the rifle hammered onto the wooden table, making the fragile porcelain candlestick crack. "Think we're joking around, old woman?" growled a tall man with a weather-beaten face, scarred from temple to chin, his teeth yellowed. Eleanor, her wrinkled hands clasped, stared at him silently. 3 strangers had burst into her cabin while she was preparing her evening herbal tea. The thought of resisting didn't even cross her mind. At 72, she wasn't going to stand much of a chance against 3 strong men. "Are you deaf?" The second poacher, a burly man with a beard, roughly grabbed Eleanor by the shoulder and shook her. "What do you want?" the old woman asked calmly, though fear knotted her stomach. The third, the youngest, nervously shifted his weight by the door, constantly peering out the window. "Mark, there's someone out there," he suddenly blurted. "Shut up, Mikey," snarled the scarred man. "There's no one here but this old lady." "I heard it. Something big," the young man insisted. "It's the wind," Eleanor said slowly, "blowing snow off the roof." The scarred man, Mark, smirked and leaned close to the old woman's face. "Listen, Grandma, we need you as a guide. Lead us through the pass and you'll live. Refuse, and, well, you know." Eleanor knew what those words meant. Poachers, smugglers. The radio had recently warned about a gang hunting endangered animals for private collectors. She just hadn't thought they'd venture into such a remote area. Outside the window, a distinct sound echoed, a strange, abrupt cry that sent shivers down the intruder's spines. "What the hell was that?" The bearded man jumped. Eleanor smiled almost imperceptibly. "Before we begin, tell us what city you're from, subscribe, like, and watch until the end. Here we go. 4 years ago. Eleanor had lost her way. The snow blinded her, turning the familiar trail into a white haze. A February blizzard had caught her on her way back from the weather station, where she collected data for her observations. "Terrible timing," she muttered, adjusting her scarf. A former zoologist, and now a volunteer for the Cedar Grove Wildlife Reserve, Eleanor Sokoloff had lived in a tiny cabin on the biological station grounds for 20 years. After the death of her husband, Walter, the reserve's director, the city apartment had become a cage from which she'd fled back to the Alaskan wilderness. Eleanor tripped over a snow-covered root and fell, sinking into a drift. A sharp pain shot through her ankle. "Just what I needed," she gasped, trying to get up. Her leg responded with a jolt of pain. A sprain or a twist. Either way, a serious problem in 30-degree below weather 2 miles from her cabin. Eleanor looked around. Her cabin was too far to hobble to with an injured leg. She needed to find temporary shelter. "An old spruce tree must be around here somewhere," she mumbled, recalling the local map. The wind strengthened, pelting her face with stinging snow. Eleanor stubbornly pushed forward, leaning on her makeshift staff. Through the snowy veil, she discerned a dark spot, a giant spruce under whose canopy she could weather the storm. When she was just a few yards from the tree, Eleanor heard a strange sound, a quiet, pained growl. She froze, peering into the darkness beneath the spruce. There, curled up, lay a lynx, a large female with unusually golden fur. The animal was breathing heavily, its paw bloody. "Poor dear," Eleanor whispered, slowly approaching. 20 years of studying wild cats hadn't been in vain. Eleanor knew a wounded predator could be dangerous, but she also saw that the lynx was weakened from blood loss and cold. "Easy, girl," she said reassuringly, pulling a first aid kit from her backpack. "I won't hurt you." The lynx raised its head, its amber eyes watching the human intently. But it didn't attempt to attack. Eleanor carefully drew closer and saw the wound. A piece of a metal arrow shaft was protruding from the lynx's left side. Poaching with a crossbow. "Those scoundrels!" Eleanor hissed. "Hold on, I'll help you." She took an anesthetic spray from her kit, treated the area around the wound, then put on gloves and firmly grasped the broken arrow. "Sorry, sweetie, this will hurt," Eleanor warned, and with one swift motion extracted the arrow. The lynx cried out, twitched, but didn't bite the human. Eleanor quickly disinfected the wound and bandaged it. "There, the worst is over," she said soothingly. "Now we need to get warm." Eleanor spread a foil emergency blanket under the spruce, laid dry moss she found there on top, and made an improvised bed. "Come here," she called to the lynx. To Eleanor's surprise, the animal slowly crawled over and lay down in the prepared spot. The biologist covered the lynx with the second half of the blanket and sat beside it, leaning against the spruce trunk. "You're unusual," she said, examining the lynx's golden fur. "I've been working with wildcats for 20 years, but I've never seen such a color." The blizzard intensified, but it was relatively safe under the thick canopy. Eleanor took out a thermos of hot tea, took a sip, and poured a little into the lid. "Want some?" she offered the lynx. The animal cautiously sniffed the liquid but didn't drink. "Don't trust me?" Eleanor chuckled. "Rightly so. You can't survive in the wilderness without caution." Eleanor took another sip of tea. Her own leg was starting to throb more severely. She carefully removed her boot and examined her ankle. Swollen, but thankfully not broken. A sprain or severe strain. Eleanor applied a tight bandage, swallowed a painkiller, and put her boot back on. "Well, this is our life," she told the lynx. "Two injured ladies in a snowstorm. Will we make it?" The lynx looked at her with intelligent, understanding amber eyes. Eleanor reached into her backpack and pulled out a packet of dried meat. "You must be hungry," she said, breaking off a piece and offering it to the lynx. The animal sniffed it, cautiously took the treat from her hand, and devoured it. "Good," Eleanor smiled. "Eat up. Get your strength back." The wind howled through the trees and snow covered everything. Eleanor knew they would have to spend the entire night under the spruce. She put her backpack under her head and, despite the pain in her leg, drifted off to sleep. She woke to a sensation of warmth. The lynx was lying beside her, pressed against her, its body warm. "Decided to keep me warm?" Eleanor wondered. "Thank you, dear." She gently touched the golden fur. The lynx didn't flinch, allowing itself to be petted. "I'll call you Ember," Eleanor said, "for the color of your eyes and fur. Do you mind?" The lynx blinked, as if agreeing. By morning the blizzard had subsided. Eleanor woke to the bright sun piercing through the snow-laden branches. No one was beside her. "Ember?" she called, looking around. There was no reply. Eleanor sighed and began to pack up. Her legs still hurt, but she could walk slowly. She had just zipped her backpack when she heard a rustle. Ember emerged from behind a nearby tree. The lynx held a freshly caught rabbit in its teeth. "Brought breakfast?" Eleanor smiled. "How kind of you." The lynx placed its prey at the woman's feet and stepped back as if offering it. "Thanks, but I think I'll pass on raw meat." Eleanor shook her head. "That's your meal." She struggled to her feet, leaning on her staff. "I need to go home," she told the lynx, "and you need to go back to the forest. Be careful of poachers." Eleanor slowly limped towards her cabin. Each step brought pain, but she stubbornly pressed on. A few minutes later, she noticed Ember following her, keeping a small distance. "Escorting me?" Eleanor was surprised. "You don't have to. I'll make it." But the lynx didn't fall behind. When Eleanor stumbled or sank into a snowdrift, Ember would come closer, as if ready to support her. The journey to the cabin took almost 3 hours. Eleanor saw the familiar chimney from which smoke was rising with relief. "Stephen built a fire," she smiled. "Worries, the old grump." Park ranger Stephen, her longtime friend and colleague, often checked in on Eleanor when she was delayed on patrol. "You can't go any further," Eleanor told the lynx. "Stephen might misunderstand your intentions." Ember stopped at the edge of the forest, watching the woman. "Thanks for the company," Eleanor nodded. "And happy hunting." She hobbled to the cabin. Looking back from the doorstep, Eleanor saw that the lynx was still standing among the trees, watching her. "Eleanor!" Stephen flung the door open. "I was starting to worry something had happened." "Almost did," she sighed, stepping over the threshold. "Twisted my ankle, spent the night in the forest." "Good heavens!" the ranger exclaimed, throwing up his hands. "And I was wondering why you weren't back. I was about to organize a search party." "Don't exaggerate, Stephen," Eleanor waved him off. "I'm still an experienced field biologist. It's not my first night in the wilderness." "Tramping through a blizzard at 72, the ranger grumbled, helping her off with her outer clothing. "That's suicide, not field work." "Better put the kettle on," Eleanor smiled, "and get the first aid kit. I need to rebandage my leg." While Stephen bustled with the kettle, Eleanor went to the window. Ember had already vanished, disappearing into the forest. "Thank you, my golden one," the woman whispered. "I hope we meet again." Ember came a week later. Eleanor was sitting on the porch, basking in the spring sun, when she noticed movement at the edge of the woods. The golden lynx was cautiously approaching the cabin, carrying something resembling a grouse in its teeth. "Ember!" Eleanor exclaimed with delight. "You haven't forgotten me?" The lynx came to the porch and laid its prey at the woman's feet. "Bringing me gifts?" Eleanor smiled. "How thoughtful of you." She stepped off the porch and gently stroked the lynx's head. Ember allowed herself to be touched, but remained wary, ready to spring away at any moment. "Is your wound healed?" Eleanor asked, carefully examining the animal's side. The arrow marks had almost disappeared. Only a small scar remained as a reminder of the injury. "Good, very good," the woman nodded. "You're a strong girl." Ember quietly snorted, as if agreeing with the compliment. Thus began their unusual friendship. The lynx would visit every few days, often bringing prey. Sometimes she stayed overnight, settling on an old blanket by the stove. Other times she left after a brief visit. Eleanor kept a journal, recording all her observations. 20 years of studying wild cats, and now such a unique case. The trust of a wild lynx in a human. "They won't believe me in the scientific community," she told Ember, writing down her observations. "They'll say the old woman has lost her mind." The lynx lay by the stove, watching the human with clear amber eyes. When summer arrived, Eleanor often took Ember with her on patrols of the area. The lynx would follow her, sometimes darting off on its own business, but always returning by the end of the route. One day they stumbled upon poacher tracks, snares on animal trails, traps near a watering hole. "Scoundrels!" Eleanor hissed, removing a snare from a tree. "They're back." Ember sniffed anxiously, her fur bristling along her spine. "Do you smell them?" Eleanor asked. Are they close? The lynx looked toward the mountain pass and let out a low growl. Understood. The woman nodded. I need to warn Stephen. That evening she contacted the ranger via radio. Stephen, I've got signs of poaching activity in Sector B7. Please check it out. Got it, Eleanor, the ranger replied. The inspector and I will be out there tomorrow. By the way, we've had some intelligence come in. A gang of smugglers has appeared in the neighboring district. They're trapping rare animals for sale overseas. Is that right? Eleanor frowned. Be careful, Stephen. These people can be dangerous. Don't you worry, the ranger chuckled. We're not going in empty-handed either. Eleanor switched off the radio and looked at Ember. We need to be more careful, she said. If these people find out about you with your unusual coloring, you'll be tempting prey for them. The lynx seemed to understand her words. She came closer and rested her head on Eleanor's lap. My clever girl, the woman smiled, stroking the golden fur. We'll get through this, won't we? A year after their first meeting, Eleanor was sitting on her cabin porch, sorting herbs for tea, when she heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. It was Stephen's old Jeep. Hello, Professor, the ranger called, getting out of the car. Care for some tea? Come on in, of course, Eleanor smiled, and I invite Inspector Davies as well. A short, burly man in a park inspector's uniform emerged from the passenger door. Good afternoon, Eleanor, he greeted her. Are we intruding? Not at all. I'm glad for the company, the woman replied, ushering her guests inside. Sit down. I'll put the kettle on now. Once everyone was settled around the table with mugs of hot tea, Stephen got to the point. Eleanor, we have a problem. That gang of smugglers I mentioned has moved into our area. Are they dangerous? The woman frowned. Very, the inspector nodded. 3 armed men. The leader is a certain Mark Blackwood, previously convicted of illegal hunting and animal trafficking. With him is his accomplice, Boris Stone, and some young fellow, presumably Michael Rivers. What do they want in our reserve? Eleanor asked, though she already suspected the answer. Rumor has it, Stephen said slowly, that an unusual lynx was seen in our reserve, a golden one. An order for such a rarity could be worth tens of thousands of dollars. Eleanor felt a chill. Ember. They were hunting Ember. Those are just rumors, she said as calmly as she could. I've worked here for 20 years and have never seen a lynx of that color. Stephen looked at her intently, but didn't accuse her of lying. Perhaps, he nodded, but these men believe in rumors, and they're already here. Yesterday we found their camp near the eastern boundary of the reserve, traps, traces of a high-clearance vehicle. We've increased patrols, the inspector added, but the territory is vast. We can't cover everything. I understand, Eleanor nodded. Thank you for the warning. Eleanor, Stephen leaned closer. If you know anything about this lynx, you'd better tell us. We could ensure its safety. The woman pondered for a moment. Tell them about Ember? But what if the lynx ended up in the hands of scientists, kept in an enclosure, studied? I know nothing about a golden lynx, Eleanor replied firmly, but I'll keep my eyes open. The guests left soon after, leaving Eleanor alone with her troubling thoughts. She went out onto the porch and stared into the forest for a long time. Ember, she whispered, be careful, my dear. The hunters are coming. The next few days, Eleanor didn't see the lynx and began to worry. She covered familiar trails, checked the places where they'd met Ember, but there were no traces of the golden cat anywhere. On the fourth day, returning from her rounds, Eleanor noticed fresh tracks on the trail. Several people, heavy boots, deep imprints. Poachers. She quickened her pace, trying to reach her cabin before dark. Just as she reached the porch, she heard a faint moan from behind the shed. "Who's there?" Eleanor took a folding knife from her pocket, the only weapon she had. The moan repeated. Carefully rounding the shed, the woman saw Ember. The lynx lay on the ground, breathing heavily. Her hind paw was caught in a trap. "Ember!" Eleanor rushed to the animal. "My God, what have they done to you?" She examined the trap, heavy, with jagged edges. The lynx had evidently struggled for a long time to free herself before limping to Eleanor's cabin. "Hold on, my dear," the woman whispered, taking a penknife from her pocket. "I'll free you now." Eleanor slipped the blade between the metal jaws and pressed with force, trying to loosen the grip. Ember whimpered quietly but didn't resist. "Just a little more," Eleanor murmured, feeling her hands go numb from the strain. Finally, the trap yielded. Eleanor quickly pulled out the injured paw and threw the iron trap aside. "There, dear, there," she comforted the lynx, gently feeling the damaged limb. "Bones seem intact, but the wounds are deep." Eleanor lifted Ember into her arms. The lynx was heavy, but fear gave the woman strength and carried her into the cabin. There she laid the animal on a blanket by the stove and began to treat the wounds. "They set the trap right outside my cabin," Eleanor muttered, rinsing the wound with antiseptic. "They knew you came to me. They were watching us." Ember quietly growled in pain, but allowed the human to help. Eleanor applied a bandage and injected a painkiller from the veterinary first aid kit she kept for emergencies. "Now rest," she said, stroking the lynx's head. "I'll guard your sleep." Eleanor bolted the door, loaded the old hunting rifle she'd inherited from her husband, and sat by the window. She knew the poachers would return for their prize. The night passed in anxious waiting, but no one appeared. In the morning, Eleanor cautiously peered out the window. No sign of intruders. Perhaps the trap had been set in advance, and the poachers didn't yet know they'd caught the golden lynx. "We need to leave here," Eleanor decided, looking at the sleeping Ember. "As soon as you're better, we'll go deeper into the reserve where they won't find us." She contacted Stephen on the radio. "Stephen, I've got poacher tracks really close to the cabin, setting traps." "The scoundrels!" the ranger exclaimed indignantly. "Hold tight, Eleanor. The inspector and I will sweep your sector today. Are you safe?" Eleanor looked at the wounded lynx. "Yes, everything's fine," she lied. "Be careful, Stephen. These people are dangerous." "Don't worry about us," the ranger assured her. "We'll be there soon." Eleanor turned off the radio and thought. Stephen and the inspector were reliable men, but if they saw Ember, what would they do with a rare lynx? Send her to a sanctuary? To a zoo for breeding? Put a tracking collar on her and monitor her every move? No, Eleanor shook her head. I can't risk that. She packed the essentials into her backpack: food, medicine, matches, compass, map. Then she retrieved the old dog sled from the attic, which her husband had used for winter expeditions. She repaired it, reinforcing the runners. By noon, Ember woke up. Her paw still hurt, but the lynx could now stand. "Good girl," Eleanor praised. "You're strong. But we need to go. It's dangerous to stay here." She loaded the essentials onto the sled, and on top she laid a thick blanket. "Lie down," she directed the lynx to the sled. "I'll pull." Ember sniffed the contraption distrustfully, but then carefully climbed onto the sled and lay down. Clever girl. Eleanor smiled, putting on the harness. Now let's go. They left through the back door, avoiding the well-worn trails. Eleanor headed towards the mountain pass, the most inaccessible part of the reserve. There, in the cliffs, was an old bear den, known only to a few. A perfect hideout. The journey was arduous. Despite the lynx's relatively small size, pulling the sled over rough terrain was not easy for a 72-year-old woman. Eleanor often stopped to catch her breath. "Old age is no joy," she muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. 20 years ago, I would have run this path without stopping." By evening, they had covered only half the distance. Eleanor made camp by a small stream. She built a fire, prepared a simple dinner. "We'll reach the hideout tomorrow," she told Ember, who was cautiously drinking water from the stream. "We'll stay there until the commotion dies down." Suddenly, the lynx raised her head and became alert. Her ears perked up, her eyes fixed on the dark forest. "What is it?" Eleanor worried. "Is someone coming?" Ember let out a low growl, staring intently at one spot. Eleanor slowly reached for her rifle. A young man, the third poacher, Mikey, emerged from the bushes. He froze when he saw the rifle pointed at him. "Don't shoot!" he blurted, raising his hands. "I'm unarmed." "What do you want?" Eleanor asked, not lowering the rifle. "How did you find us?" "I was watching your cabin," the young man confessed. "Saw you leave. I wanted to warn you." "About what?" Eleanor frowned. "Mark and Boris know about your lynx," Mikey said hurriedly. "They saw her on a trail camera. They say some Arab sheikh will pay a fortune for such a rarity. They're planning a massive hunt." Eleanor scrutinized the young man's face. Young, around 20, with nervous movements and a restless gaze. "Why did you decide to warn us?" she asked, still distrustful. "You're with them." Mikey lowered his head. "I didn't want to be part of this. Mark dragged me into it. Said it was quick money, no risk. I didn't know then that they were trapping animals for sale." "And when you found out, you decided to stay with them?" Eleanor asked with disdain. "I was afraid to leave," the young man said softly. "Mark, he's a dangerous man. He said if I tried to bail, he'd bury me in the woods, and no one would ever find me." Ember had been watching the newcomer intently all this time. She didn't show aggression, but she wasn't relaxed either. "The lynx hardly fears me," Mikey remarked, surprised. "And she's wild." "Ember isn't an ordinary lynx," Eleanor replied, lowering her rifle slightly. "She's smarter than many people, and kinder." The young man cautiously crouched down, his eyes still fixed on the golden cat. "I've never seen such beauty," he whispered. "Now I understand why Mark is so obsessed with her. He even mutters about golden fur in his sleep." "Where are your friends now?" Eleanor asked. 3 miles from here, at the hunting lodge," Mikey replied. "They're sweeping sector by sector. They have a jeep, night vision scopes, tranquilizers. They're serious." Eleanor pondered. Time was short. They needed to leave immediately. "What are you going to do now?" she asked the young man. Mikey shrugged. "I don't know. I want to leave them, but I'm scared, and I can't go home. My mom kicked me out after my last stint in jail." "Jail?" Eleanor repeated. "You've been to jail?" 2 years for theft," the young man admitted reluctantly. "But I'm done with that, honestly. It's just hard to start over when you have a record." Eleanor looked intently at the young man. There was a sincerity about him. Or was she too naive at 72? "All right," she decided. "You can come with us. You'll help me pull the sled. But be warned, one suspicious move, and I won't hesitate to shoot." "Thank you," Mikey exhaled with relief. "I won't let you down." They quickly broke camp and moved on. Now the young man pulled the sled while Eleanor walked alongside, rifle ready. Ember seemed to accept the newcomer. She lay peacefully on the sled, only occasionally raising her head to look around. "Where are we going?" Mikey asked after a while. "To a place few know about," Eleanor replied. "An old bear's den in the cliffs. We'll wait it out there." "And then?" "We'll see." The woman shrugged. "I hope Stephen and the inspector catch your buddies, and we can go back." "They won't be easy to catch." Mikey shook his head. "Mark has connections in the area and serious weapons." "We'll see," Eleanor said curtly. They walked all night, taking short breaks. By dawn, they reached the foot of the rocky hills where the mountain pass began. "The path is harder from here," Eleanor warned. "We'll have to carry the sled." Mikey nodded, saying nothing. He carefully lifted the sled with the links, slung the straps over his shoulders, and began to ascend the rocky trail. Eleanor led the way, pointing out the path. After an hour of arduous climbing, they reached a rock ledge, behind which opened the entrance to a small cave. "We're here," Eleanor gasped. "Now we need to settle in." They brought the sled into the cave. Inside, it was dry and relatively warm. Tracks indicated that the bear hadn't used this den for several years. Mikey built a small fire near the entrance, positioned so the smoke would drift outside. Eleanor examined Ember's paw and changed the bandage. "Healing well," she noted with satisfaction. "You'll be able to walk normally in a few days." The lynx licked the woman's hand, as if in gratitude. "Incredible!" Mikey shook his head, watching the scene. "How did you tame her?" "I didn't tame her," Eleanor countered. "We're friends. I saved her from a poacher's arrow 4 years ago, and she saved me from loneliness." Eleanor told the young man the story of their meeting. Mikey listened with genuine interest. "How old is she?" he asked when Eleanor finished her story. "About 6, I think," the woman replied. "That's a mature age for a lynx. They live up to 15 years in the wild." "And why is her coloring so unusual?" "It's a genetic anomaly," Eleanor explained. "A rare mutation that affects fur pigmentation. Only a few such cases have been described in scientific literature. Usually, such individuals don't survive in the wild. They're too conspicuous to predators and prey, but Ember is intelligent and cautious." They ate canned food for dinner, washing it down with hot tea. Mikey volunteered to stand first watch, and Eleanor, tired from the arduous journey, agreed to rest. She lay down next to Ember, who immediately snuggled closer, warming her with her body heat. "Good night, girl," Eleanor whispered, closing her eyes. "Tomorrow will be a new day." In the middle of the night, she was woken by quiet conversation. Mikey was talking on the radio, the very one Eleanor had left in her backpack. "In the cliffs, in the old den," the young man whispered. "Yes, the lynx is with them, injured but alive." Eleanor froze, not opening her eyes. Traitor! He was leading the poachers to their trail. "No, Mark, not like that," the young man continued to whisper. "I don't want to be part of this. This woman, she doesn't deserve it, and neither does the lynx." A pause. "No, I'm not asking for money. I just want to leave. This is my last job for you." Another pause. "Okay, I understand. I'll keep them here until morning. I'll wait." Mikey turned off the radio and took a deep breath. Eleanor partially opened her eyes. The young man sat by the fire, holding his head in his hands. "I knew it," she said quietly, making him jump. "You led them here." "Eleanor, he began, but trailed off under her cold gaze. "How much did they pay you?" the woman asked, sitting up and feeling for her rifle. "Nothing!" Mikey exclaimed. "I didn't take a penny from them." "Then why?" Eleanor aimed the rifle at the young man. "Why betray us?" Mikey lowered his head. "I was scared, Eleanor. Mark said if I didn't help find the lynx, I'd become the prey myself. He wouldn't hesitate." "So you decided to sacrifice us," the woman said bitterly. "No!" The young man looked at her desperately. "I lied to Mark. I told him you were heading to the eastern boundary of the reserve, to the old ranger station. They'll go there." Eleanor stared intently at Mikey, trying to understand if he was lying again. "I heard your conversation," she finally said. "You said we were in the den." Mikey paled. "You weren't asleep? Then you didn't hear the whole conversation. At first, I really was going to give you up. I'm terrified. I don't want to die in the woods at Mark's hand. But then I remembered how you trusted me, how that lynx looked at me, and I couldn't do it. I gave them false coordinates." Ember, roused by their conversation, got up and approached the young man. She sniffed him, then looked at Eleanor and quietly snorted. "See?" Mikey said. "She trusts me. Animals can sense lies." Eleanor hesitated. The lynx truly showed no unease around the young man. Perhaps she had been wrong? "If you're telling the truth," she said slowly, lowering the rifle, "we need to leave here in the morning. They'll realize you tricked them and start searching again." "Yes," Mikey nodded. "I know where we can go. On the western side of the reserve, there's an abandoned research station. It's hard to get to, only on foot, but it has radio communication. We can call for help." Eleanor considered this. The plan was risky, but they had no better option. "All right," she finally decided. "We move at dawn." They left when the first rays of the sun were just beginning to filter through the cliffs. Ember could already walk on her own, though she still limped. They had to leave the sled behind. They couldn't navigate the narrow mountain trails with it. "If we go non-stop, we'll reach the station by nightfall," Mikey said, consulting the map he found in Eleanor's backpack. They descended from the hills and plunged into the forest. Eleanor walked ahead, leaning on her makeshift staff. Mikey lagged slightly behind, carrying the backpack with supplies. Ember moved alongside the woman, sometimes darting ahead, but always returning. The day was hot. By noon, they made a stop by a small stream. Eleanor moistened a cloth and wiped her face. "At my age, such treks aren't easy," she confessed. "You're doing great, Eleanor," Mikey said sincerely. "I've never met such a strong old lady." The woman chuckled. 20 years in the wilderness hardens your character, and your body too." They had a quick bite and continued. The forest grew thicker, the trail less distinct. Sometimes they had to push through thickets of bushes or clamber over fallen trees. Suddenly, Ember froze and became alert. Her ears perked up. The fur on her back bristled. "What is it?" Eleanor worried. Mikey looked around. "I don't know. Maybe a bear?" The lynx kept her eyes fixed on the thicket ahead. A cracking sound came from there. "Back!" Mikey whispered, pulling Eleanor behind the trunk of a large pine. They had barely managed to hide when 2 men with rifles emerged into the clearing, Mark and Boris. "The tracks are fresh," the bearded Boris said, pointing to the ground. "They passed through here not more than an hour ago." I told you Mikey was lying, Mark hissed angrily. There's no outpost to the east. That old grouch of a ranger said the old woman has been living alone in her cabin for years, and they saw her with some big cat. You think Mikey's with them? Boris asked. I'm certain, Mark nodded. The pup got scared. No worries, we'll find all of them. The poachers moved on, following the tracks left by Eleanor and her companions. They're after us, Eleanor whispered when the men were out of sight. How did they find us? Mikey paled. I don't know. Mark probably didn't believe my lie about the outpost and decided to check the den, and from there he tracked us. They have rifles, Eleanor reminded him. We can't escape them. There's one way, the young man said thoughtfully. We need to split up. I'll go alone, leaving noticeable tracks. I'll lead them far away, and you and Ember can reach the station. They'll kill you. The woman shook her head. You heard Mark. They won't kill me, Mikey argued. They need me. I know all their caches, connections, distribution channels. I have an ace up my sleeve. Eleanor hesitated. The plan was risky, but perhaps the only way to save Ember. I can't let you risk your life, she said. You're still young. And you're an old, sick woman with a wounded lynx. Mikey chuckled. Forgive my bluntness, but your chances of getting away from them are lower than mine. He was right, and Eleanor knew it. All right, she finally agreed, but be careful. Don't worry, the young man nodded. I may be a petty thief, but I'm not a fool. Mark and Boris are dangerous types, but predictable. I can lead them on a wild goose chase long enough. He took a compass and map from his backpack and handed them to Eleanor. Head northwest, he pointed. In 6 miles, you'll reach a river. Follow the river downstream for another 3 miles. You'll see the research station on a hill, a concrete building with an antenna. Thank you, Mikey, Eleanor said softly. You're a good person, despite everything. Don't overdo it. The young man blushed. I'm just tired of being afraid and running. I want to do the right thing for once. He bent down to Ember, gently stroking her head. Take care of your mistress, beautiful. She's special. The lynx looked at him with her amber eyes, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. Mikey winked. Well, I'm off. Good luck. He loudly crunched through the branches, heading east, in the opposite direction from the station. Eleanor watched him until his figure disappeared among the trees. Come on, Ember, she said quietly. We need to hurry. They moved northwest, trying to be as quiet as possible and leave no noticeable tracks. Eleanor used all the knowledge gained over years of living in the wilderness, stepping on firm surfaces, bypassing soft ground and mud where footprints might remain. Ember seemed to understand the need for caution. She moved silently, often stopping and listening. They walked for several hours. The sun began to dip toward the horizon when a gunshot echoed in the distance. Eleanor froze. 1 shot, then a second. Silence. Mikey, she whispered, clutching her staff tighter. I hope you're alive, boy. They quickened their pace. Soon the sound of water reached them ahead, the river Mikey had spoken of. Eleanor stepped onto the bank with relief. A swift current, gravel bars, rocky rapids. Now downstream, she told Ember, another 3 miles. Walking along the river was easier. The bank was relatively flat without thick undergrowth, but Eleanor felt her strength draining. Age and the strain of the past few days were taking their toll. When the concrete building of the research station appeared on the horizon, the sun had already hidden behind the mountains. Dusk was rapidly turning into night. Almost there, Eleanor encouraged the lynx, who also looked tired. We'll rest soon. They climbed the hill. The research station had been abandoned long ago. Windows broken, the door askew, the antenna on the roof partially collapsed. But it was still shelter. Eleanor cautiously entered, rifle at the ready. Empty. Only old furniture covered in a thick layer of dust and tattered maps on the walls. "Make yourself at home," she told Ember, gesturing to an old sofa in the corner. "This is our house now." The lynx circled the room, sniffing the corners, then jumped onto the sofa and curled up. Eleanor found an old kerosene lamp. Miraculously, it still had fuel. She lit it, illuminating the room with a dim yellow light. In the corner stood a radio, old, from the Soviet era, but possibly still working. Eleanor approached it, dusted it off, checked the wires. "I need to try to contact Stephen," she said aloud. "He'll raise the alarm." Eleanor turned on the power, and to her surprise, the radio hummed to life. Old technology was more reliable than new. She tuned to the frequency used by the reserve staff. "Stephen, do you read me? Over," she called. "This is Eleanor Sokolov. Over." Through the crackle of static, the ranger's agitated voice came through. "Eleanor, thank goodness. We've been looking all over for you. Where are you?" "At the old research station in the west of the reserve," Eleanor replied. "Stephen, we have a problem. Poachers are after Ember." "After whom?" The ranger didn't understand. "After the lynx, the unusual golden-colored one. She's my friend. I've kept her a secret all these years." A pause on the other end of the line. "Eleanor, are you all right?" Stephen finally asked. "Do you need help?" "Yes, I do," the woman replied irritably. "3 armed poachers, Mark Blackwood, Boris Stone, and a young man, Michael. They're hunting us." "We know these types," Stephen said gravely. "The inspector has requested backup from the district center. Repeat your location." Eleanor gave the coordinates of the research station, which she found on a map on the wall. "Are you safe there?" the ranger asked. "Relatively," Eleanor replied. "The building is solid and I have a rifle, but these people are desperate, Stephen. They want Ember at any cost." "Hold on, Eleanor. We're leaving immediately. We'll be there by morning. Don't leave the station and stay in touch." "Thank you, Stephen," the woman exhaled with relief. "I'll be waiting." She turned off the radio and went to Ember, who was intently watching her from the sofa. "Help is on the way, girl," Eleanor said, sitting beside her. "We just need to hold out until morning." She took the remaining food from her backpack, crackers, dried meat, a chocolate bar. She shared the meat with the lynx and ate crackers herself. "What happens next, Ember?" Eleanor quietly asked, stroking the golden fur. "If they find out about you, they'll take you under state protection, maybe put you in a sanctuary. Scientific value, all that." The lynx looked at her with intelligent eyes, as if understanding every word. "And I'll go back to my cabin. I'll live out my days alone." Tears welled up at the thought. In 4 years, Ember had become more than just a wild cat to her. She was a friend, a companion, almost family. "All right, let's just get through this night," Eleanor sighed, wiping her eyes. "And then we'll see." She extinguished the lamp to conserve kerosene and settled on the sofa next to the lynx. Outside it was dark. Only the stars twinkled in the clear mountain air. Eleanor dozed off, lulled by Ember's steady breathing, but she slept lightly, like a person who had spent many years in the wild. In the middle of the night, the lynx tensed and raised her head. "Eleanor, instantly woke up. "What is it?" she whispered. Ember let out a low growl, staring at the door. Eleanor cautiously took the safety off her rifle. Footsteps sounded outside. Someone was slowly approaching the station. "Who's there?" Eleanor asked loudly, pointing the rifle at the door. "Don't shoot! It's me, Mikey," a familiar voice called out. The door creaked open, and the silhouette of the young man appeared in the doorway. "Mikey?" Eleanor was surprised. "You're alive." "For now, yes," he chuckled grimly, stepping inside. "But I barely got away from Mark. He's a real tracker, has a nose like a bloodhound." The young man looked exhausted. His clothes were torn, his face scratched, his left arm hung limply. "You're wounded," Eleanor noted, peering into the darkness. "The bullet went clean through," Mikey replied, sitting on a chair. "But the bone seems to be all right." Eleanor lit the lamp and examined the wound. Indeed, the bullet had passed through the soft tissue of his shoulder without hitting the bone. "You're lucky," she said, taking the first aid kit from her backpack. "We'll clean and bandage it now." While Eleanor was tending to his wound, Mikey recounted, "I led them in circles for about 2 hours. Then Mark realized I was fooling them and shot. I fell, played dead. They searched me, took everything valuable, and left. They thought I wouldn't make it." "Cruel people." Eleanor shook her head, tightening the bandage. "That's not all," the young man continued grimly. "I overheard their conversation. Mark figured out you were heading to the research station. They'll be here by dawn." Eleanor felt a chill. "Then we need to leave, immediately." "Where?" Mikey threw up his hands. "At night, in the wilderness, with a wounded lynx? We won't get far." "We have a rifle," Eleanor reminded him, "and strong walls. We'll hold out until help arrives." "I contacted Stephen," she clarified, seeing the confusion on the young man's face. "They've left. They'll be here by morning." "Will they make it in time?" Mikey shook his head doubtfully. "Mark won't wait. He came for the lynx and won't leave without her." Eleanor understood that the young man was right. They wouldn't last until morning if the poachers decided to storm the station. "We need to come up with a plan," she said, finishing the bandage. "Something to distract them, buy us time." Mikey suddenly brightened. "I have an idea. There should be an emergency flare kit at the station. They always keep those at remote rangers' stations and outposts, for distress signals." He began rummaging through cabinets and shelves and soon found a tin box labeled Emergency Kit. "Here!" Mikey exclaimed triumphantly. 4 flare rockets, old Soviet ones, but they should work." "And what do you propose?" Eleanor asked. "Distract them," the young man explained. "Launch flares from different points. Create the impression that a police unit has already arrived. Mark will get scared and retreat." The plan was risky, but they had no other options. "All right," Eleanor nodded. "But how can we launch them from different places simultaneously?" Mikey thought for a moment. "One of us will have to go out and launch the flares from various positions." "I'll go," he said immediately, seeing Eleanor open her mouth to object. "I have a better chance of slipping through unnoticed. Besides, you have to stay with Ember." Eleanor hesitated. Sending a wounded young man on such a mission was risky, but he was right. Someone had to stay with the lynx. "All right," she finally agreed, "but be careful and come back immediately after launching the flares." "Don't worry," Mikey nodded. "I'll handle it." He took 3 flares, leaving 1 for Eleanor. "Give me an hour," he said. "When you hear the first flare, Wait another 15 minutes, then launch yours directly from the station roof. We'll create the illusion of being surrounded." Eleanor nodded. The plan was good. Mikey checked the launcher, made sure everything was working, and headed for the door. "Good luck," Eleanor said, "and thank you." "No problem," the young man chuckled. "Consider it my redemption." He stepped out into the night, and Eleanor was left alone with Ember. "Well, girl," she said to the lynx, stroking her head, "now everything depends on Mikey and on us." Time stretched agonizingly slowly. Eleanor went to the window every 5 minutes, peering into the darkness. Ember also wasn't sleeping, constantly listening for sounds outside. An hour passed, but no flares appeared. Eleanor began to worry. What had happened to Mikey? Had the poachers caught him, or had he betrayed them again? And then a bright red flash sliced through the night sky. The flare soared high, illuminating the area for miles around. It worked, Eleanor breathed out. She began counting 15 minutes, as they had agreed. 7 minutes later, a second flare went off, from the opposite direction. 5 more minutes, a third. "Time," Eleanor said, grabbing her flare and heading for the ladder leading to the roof. She climbed out, set up the launcher, and pulled the trigger. The fourth flare hissed into the night sky, exploding in a brilliant red light. Eleanor climbed back down, went to the window, and waited. First there was silence, then shouts and the sound of an engine. The poacher's jeep started and quickly drove away. "They're retreating," Eleanor rejoiced. "Good job, Mikey." She waited for the young man to return, but minutes passed, and he didn't appear. "Something's happened," the woman worried. "He should have been back by now." Ember restlessly paced the room, glancing at the door. "Do you also feel something's wrong?" Eleanor asked. The lynx let out a low growl, looking out the window. Eleanor followed her gaze and saw approaching lights. Many lights. "Stephen," she exhaled with relief. They came early. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch. But instead of the ranger and backup, she saw Mark, Boris, and Mikey. The young man stood with his head down, held by his collar by the bearded Boris. "Good evening, Grandma," Mark sneered, aiming his rifle at Eleanor. "Thanks for the pretty fireworks. We knew right where to find you." Eleanor froze. It was a trap. Mikey was all she could manage. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," the young man said quietly, not looking up. "They caught me when I launched the first flare. They threatened to kill me if I didn't help lure you into a trap." "Enough chatter," Mark interrupted him. "Where's the lynx?" Eleanor remained silent, blocking the doorway to the house. "Didn't you understand?" the poacher hissed, taking a step forward. "I asked, where is the golden lynx?" "She's not here," Eleanor replied firmly. "I let her go." "You're lying, old woman," Mark laughed. "Mikey said you two are inseparable." He nodded to Boris. "Check the house." The bearded man pushed Mikey aside and headed for the door, but Eleanor didn't move. "Get out of the way, old woman," Boris said roughly, "or it'll be worse for you." "I won't let you," Eleanor replied stubbornly, squaring her shoulders. Boris raised his hand to strike, but before he could, a golden flash of lightning sprang from the doorway. Ember. With a furious snarl, the lynx launched herself at the assailant, sinking her teeth into his arm. "Ah, ah, ah!" Boris screamed, trying to shake off the animal. "Get her off! Get her off!" Mark raised his rifle, aiming at the lynx, but Eleanor threw herself at him, knocking his aim off. The shot went into the air. "Damn old hag!" the poacher swore, pushing the woman away. Eleanor fell to the ground, hitting her head on the rocks. Spots danced before her eyes. Ember continued to attack Boris, who was frantically fighting back. Mark aimed again, but then Mikey entered the fray. With a shout, he lunged at the poacher, knocking him to the ground. The rifle fell from Mark's hands. A desperate struggle ensued. Mikey and Mark wrestled on the ground, exchanging blows. Boris finally shook off the lynx and breathed heavily, clutching his injured arm. Eleanor struggled to her feet. Her head was pounding, but she knew she had to act. She rushed to Mark's fallen rifle, grabbed it, and fired into the air. "Stop!" she cried in a hoarse voice. "The next bullet is for you." The fight ceased. Mark and Mikey froze, breathing heavily. Boris, pressing his injured arm to his chest, stared in horror at the rifle aimed at him. "Now, everyone slowly get up and walk to the car," Eleanor commanded. "Ember, to me!" The lynx obediently retreated, standing beside her mistress. Her muzzle was stained with blood, but she herself was unharmed. "You'll regret this, old woman," Mark hissed, getting up from the ground. "We'll be back." "No, you won't," a new voice cut in. Stephen, the inspector, and 3 police officers with weapons emerged from the darkness. "Hands on your heads," one of the officers commanded. "You're under arrest for poaching, assault, and trespassing on reserved property." Mark and Boris exchanged glances as if considering resistance, but seeing the number of opponents, they surrendered. "Eleanor!" Stephen rushed to the woman. "Are you all right? Not injured?" "Alive," she smiled weakly, lowering the rifle. "A bit bruised, but alive." Her gaze fell on Mikey, who was sitting on the ground holding his injured shoulder. Blood was seeping through the bandage again. "This young man needs help," she told the ranger. "A bullet wound." "We'll help everyone now." Stephen nodded, looking around. "And where's—" He fell silent, seeing Ember, who was warily watching the strangers, ready to defend Eleanor at any moment. "Well, I'll be," the ranger breathed out. "So this is your friend." Eleanor placed a hand on the lynx's neck. "Yes, this is Ember, my most loyal friend." A month had passed since that dramatic night at the research station. Mark and Boris were arrested and awaiting trial. Mikey, after treatment in the hospital, became a key prosecution witness. Thanks to his testimony, the police uncovered an entire network of smugglers involved in trapping and selling rare animals. Eleanor returned to her cabin. Summer was in full swing, and she spent long hours on the porch, sorting collected medicinal herbs and observing the forest life. Ember remained with her. The trap wound had fully healed, and the lynx could now hunt again. She would go into the forest for a day or two, but always returned, often bringing prey. One morning, Stephen appeared on the cabin doorstep. He seemed unusually serious. "Eleanor, there's something we need to talk about," he said, sitting beside her on the porch. "People from the Department of Natural Resources have arrived. They've learned about your lynx." Eleanor tensed. "What do they want?" "They want to study the rare color mutation," the ranger explained. "They say it's scientific valuable. They're suggesting placing Ember in a special enclosure in a state wildlife sanctuary for study and breeding." Eleanor felt a chill inwardly. She knew this day would come, the day Ember would be taken from her. "I won't give her up," the woman said quietly but firmly. "She's not a guinea pig for experiments. She's a living creature with her own will." "I knew you'd say that," Stephen sighed. "But they're insisting. They say by law wild animals belong to the state, especially rare species." Ember doesn't belong to anyone, Eleanor countered. Not even me. She's free to come and go. If she wishes, she can stay in the forest forever. At that moment, the lynx appeared from around the corner of the cabin. She carried a caught rabbit in her teeth. Seeing Stephen, Ember froze wary, but hearing Eleanor's calming voice, she approached closer and laid her prey at her feet. "See," Eleanor said, stroking the lynx's head, "she chooses where she wants to be, and with whom." Stephen looked thoughtfully at the scene. "You know what?" he finally said. "There's one way. Appoint me as Ember's official guardian. It's legal. On paper, she'll be under the reserve's observation, but effectively, she'll stay with you." "You'd do that?" Eleanor was surprised. "Of course." The ranger nodded. "Since you've managed with her for 4 years and everything's fine, why change anything? Scientists might need to visit occasionally, observe her, maybe take blood for analysis. Agree?" Eleanor looked at her old friend with gratitude. "Thank you, Stephen. You're a true friend." "What about Mikey?" she asked after a while. "Have you seen him?" "I have," the ranger nodded. "The young man's doing well, cooperating with the investigation. He's looking at a suspended sentence if he's lucky, and I offered him a job at the reserve when all this is over. We need a young, sharp assistant ranger." "Excellent idea," Eleanor smiled. "He'll make a good nature conservator." Stephen stood up, preparing to leave. "Well, I'm off. I'll bring those scientists tomorrow. Don't worry, I'll make sure they don't bother Ember." "Thank you," Eleanor thanked him again. "For everything?" When the ranger left, Eleanor sat on the porch for a long time, watching the sunset. Ember settled beside her, resting her head on her lap. "There you go, girl," the woman said quietly, stroking the golden fur. "Everything turned out all right. No one will take you from me, and no one will lock you in a cage." The lynx purred softly under her hand, enjoying the caresses. "You know," Eleanor continued, looking at the sunset sky, "when Walter died, I thought life was over, that only loneliness and gradual decline awaited me. And now I have you, and Stephen, and possibly Mikey soon, a small family in the middle of the wilderness." Ember looked at her with her intelligent amber eyes, full of understanding and affection. "Well," Eleanor smiled, standing up, "shall we go make dinner? That rabbit will be enough for the 2 of us." The lynx easily got up and followed her mistress into the house. Ahead of them lay the night and a new day and long years together, at the edge of the wild forest, where 2 worlds, 2 lives, 2 destinies meet. If you enjoyed the story, please share your impressions in the comments. Your opinion is very important.